as a chair of this session, so he will ask probably a lot of questions then. Anyway, I will talk about CKD MBD guidelines, and I would like to start just from the beginning, how the process worked. But writing or working on a guideline is one thing, but the other thing is, of course, to create awareness. And I will try to show you how KDIGO approaches this way. KDIGO actually aims to translate scientific advances into useful and practical clinical practice recommendations and observations, present trusted and usable global scientific information, make the global science available and understandable to clinicians around the world, implement its work through local and regional programs, taking into account cultural, economic, language, regulatory, and environmental issues, and to adapt and simplify, prioritize, and validate recommendations for clinicians' use in everyday practice as far as possible. And what I'm talking or addressing now is the 2017 CKD MBD guideline update. Looking back, it was the second guideline ever that was addressed by the KDIGO initiative, published at this time in July 2009. And given the turnover, the half-life of medical knowledge, at least after 4 to 5 years, it is usually a decent address to look at what has happened since the last publication. And KDIGO implements so-called Controversies Conference for this purpose. And the CKD MBD Controversies Conference took place in Madrid in October 24 to 27 in 2013, attended by 75 experts in the field from 19 countries. And the aim of the conference was to review the recent developments in MBD and determine whether an update of these 2009 guidelines is necessary. The conclusion here, and this is of course not for reading, but should just show the proportions of what was thought there to be addressed. So what you can see here are those guidelines underlined in red. The group in Madrid was very certain that new evidence has been raised and should be discussed in an organized manner. Those which are underlined in gray, there were some thinking about rewording, some thoughts about a new grading of these guidelines, while in the remainder it was thought there is not much new and they are still probably valid for the time being. Then a working group was composed and in this process chaired by Mary Leonard from Stanford and myself, quite an international and quite a small group actually for KDIGO purposes. And this selective update was the first selective update of its kind. And it was, and this is very important in the process, guided by a so-called evidence review team that was in this case led by Professor Karen Robinson from the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. So not nephrologists, but biometrics, statisticians who told us about study quality. This is how it looked then, the publication of the guideline, a piece of the paper that was published. And this shows on the left corner those guidelines which were published as revised in 2017. In the middle row, those guidelines from 2009. And at the end, a brief rationale for updating. So here, the working group tried to really fix with 2 or 3 sentences why it seemed or deemed necessary to change the content or the wording of the guideline. Now, what implementation activities does KDIGO perform? On the one hand, it's a dissemination of the printed supplements at major nephrology congresses from the KDIGO booth in Exhibit Hall. I have a few copies with me, so if somebody is interested in this room, I can hand them out later on. Translations. It is very well renowned that the guidelines are translated into the national languages, and I will show you a few examples in this talk. Educational symposia, live expert presentation on the guidelines, usually held in collaboration with local, regional, or international nephrology societies. Other tools are reference tools, webinars, speakers guides. And then there are also implementation summits, and this is a new program designed to implement a guideline in a specific region or country, taking into account local issues such as insurance, reimbursement, local guidelines, etc. And there is a KDIGO app. Downloads. The so-called executive summary of the 2017 chronic CKD MBD guideline appeared in Kidney International, and it was downloaded about 2 weeks ago for more than 30,000 times. The supplement, which also appeared in the Kidney International supplements, had nearly 28,000 downloads until about 2 weeks ago. And the executive summary in Kidney International actually is the second most read article in Kidney International, and the supplement was the most read in the Kidney International supplement. So a lot of attention was definitely raised with this publication. For the regional meetings, a very, I think, important and well-organized one took place in April in Tokyo, in Japan, which was chaired by Masafumi Fukagawa from Tokyo and Angela Wong from Hong Kong. This was the first meeting of its kind. It contained an in-depth analysis of the CKD MBD environment in Asia. A conference manuscript is underway. Focused presentation of the guideline designed specifically for Asian clinicians was performed. Country-by-country comparisons and contrasts were discussed, and also identification of barriers and opportunities to improve patient care. And there was a discussion with learning from each country's experiences and insights. Just an impression of this conference and on many of the participants. There was also there were other international CKD MBD implementation sessions, and they took place in total in China, India, Brazil, Mexico, Japan, Korea, Australia, Russia, Macedonia, Lebanon, Germany, Arab countries, and Canada, Nanjing, and Korean society here with pictures as an example. And then there were also update press and commentaries. Here on the left side, for example, in AJKD by Keidoki, CKJ, Annals of Internal Medicine was issued for internists by the KDIGO group itself. And these were, of course, not just praise, because there was also, there must be also criticism with some contents. Just an example cited from the AJKD publication. The KDOKI work group agrees with most of the KDIGO guideline update recommendations, particularly the suggestions regarding BMD testing, joint assessment of longitudinal trends in mineral metabolism, dietary phosphate counseling. However, the KDOKI work group has some concerns about the suggestions related to hypocalcemia, phosphate binder choice, and treatment of PTH concentrations. However, when you read the article in depth, then you see that it's more criticism on the lack of evidence. Still, in CKD MBD, like in many branches of CKD, there is too little firm and hard evidence. And the overall goal of this commentary is to provide a broad discussion for the US nephrology community regarding CKD MBD, its diagnosis, prevention, and treatment. There are further implementation tools like very illustrated and easy to look at quick reference guides that can be taken up from the KDIGO.org website, for example. There was one video produced in a kind of an interview fashion that was led by John Davis, the KDIGO CEO, with 3 participants from the work group, Geoff Block, Linda McCann, and myself. It's about 45 minutes long. You find it also on YouTube, but also on the guidelines website, which it tries to address in a practical sense these guidelines. And there are further summaries that were published and can be taken up or downloaded from the KDIGO website. And in case, for example, you as a speaker would like to work your department through the guidelines, you can even download a PowerPoint presentation that not just contains the guidelines, but also in a, I think, digestible manner, the background of the decisions that were made by the working group. And this is free, and you can use it for your in-house communication, education, for example. Update translations, I mentioned that already. Those for these updates which are already available, and again also at the website of KDIGO, in Chinese Mandarin, in French, German, Japanese, Korean, Russian. For example, I did the German translation together with Jürgen Flöge. It's usually done with two kind of experts in the field, so in order to really make sure that the sense of the guidelines is grasped, and then it has to be submitted to KDIGO, confirmed and approved, and then it is available also officially on the international website of KDIGO. Webinars, another chance. One example that was attended by 604 people who registered, which is a very high number in this case again. There are 20 plus Q&A questions that in a way can be answered. This one was held in June 21, 2017, and was supported and in collaboration with the ISN. Then there was a webinar with 173 registered participants from many countries around or close to especially Europe. And 98% rated this webinar as good or excellent, 81 as excellent, 100% the quality as excellent or good, and 95% rated fulfillments of their educational needs, and at least 2/3 of them were also excellent. So another address that worked quite well. KDIGO has been cited in more than 150 textbooks overall. I think also quite a success for this initiative. And KDIGO website and social media, follow KDIGO for updates on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So this is also continuously updated, and questions are going to be answered there. Finally, the KDIGO Clinical Practice Guidelines app is available for all topics, of course, not just for CKD MBD. And I think this is also a tool that drives guideline dissemination, implementation into the future. The final aspect is, of course, in a way, implementation has also its costs. There are some financial issues for support. And the KDIGO Board of Directors has provided a conflict of interest policy, which I would just like to address with my last two slides. KDIGO has and follows a process that requires disclosure and transparency regarding perceived industry conflicts. We make an active attempt to adhere to the IOM guidelines we can trust recommendations. We adopt this refined policy to build on our record, remain responsive to community standards, and improve our process. In addition to transparency, KDIGO guidelines maintain the highest level of scientific rigor. For a decade, we have used a robust and well-thought-out process to minimize any appearance of bias or conflict, and a rigorous process cannot prevent still criticism, but it provides a sound basis for maintaining KDIGO's reputation and commitment to scientific integrity. And I think what is most important is that KDIGO does not solicit or accept any industry funding for guidelines or updates. On the other hand, KDIGO staff who raise funds from industry do not attend the workgroup meetings or interact with members about their content of their work. Content of all guidelines and updates is totally up to the workgroup. KDIGO appoints workgroup members clearly stating this policy and requirement, their agreement and signature. The agenda for every workgroup meeting includes disclosure and updating of all financial relationships. All industry funders of any aspect of KDIGO's work are listed on its website, and KDIGO records and documents are transparent and available for sharing in response to any appropriate request for information. So with this, of course, any potential conflict of interest should be minimized, and I think that this works in most of the cases that have been done and are underway. With this, I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Ketteler. This paper is now open for discussion. Please come forward to the microphones. And while you are thinking about the question, maybe I can start off. One of the important aspects of implementation of guidelines is also being able to implement them, and I'm referring to the increasing attention for bone biopsies in the new guidelines. Could you perhaps briefly comment on that? Because it requires, of course, very specialistic knowledge on this topic.
Yeah, I think this is one of the details are the critical parts of the guideline. And what I can say is that this work also, I think, on the guideline paralleled an initiative by I think it was a CKD MBD working group of eraedta to make a survey on the indications of bone biopsy, where there were very well thought recommendations given by the responders on the indications like excluding adamantemic bone, excluding unexplained bone pain, and so on, which could be a basis to set the indications right. The second thing, which can be addressed possibly well by webinars or by international or conferences, by putting up that point, is that I lost my thought for a moment. I have it back in a minute. Okay, to address the difficulties, which are twofold. The one is the performance of the bone biopsy test by itself. The other one is the availability of pathologists.
Right.
And we can perform very many bone biopsies if we don't have the pathologists who are able to diagnose the disease. And I see one of the big specialists here in the first row, and Anibal, you can perhaps also make a brief comment on that, because we not just lack the technique, we also lack the pathobiologist for that. Finally, I think through the KDIGO initiative, there was also now a publication in one of the major nephrology journals that tried to create algorithms for clinical practice by bone biopsy matching. So in which cases it should be performed, it shouldn't be performed. That was not the task of a KDIGO guideline, because we, of course, have to stick to the published literature and not make recommendations beyond this. But it raised, obviously, the intention of primary scientists, clinician scientists, to document and to comment on this issue. And these couple of recent reviews are very helpful for decision making.
If there are no further questions, I think we'll move on. Thank you very much again, Professor Ketteler.